Right now, beneath the lush green mangrove forests of the Sundarbans, there are millions of farmers unknowingly fighting a hidden war.
Yeah, a war against 12,000-year-old seawater, essentially.
Right. Which is just wild to think about. I mean, when you look at the Sundarbans from, like, a satellite, you see this massive, sprawling labyrinth of deep green and shimmering blue.
Oh, it's stunning. It stretches right across the borders of India and Bangladesh.
Yeah, the world's largest contiguous mangrove ecosystem.
Yeah.
But, beyond the UNESCO World Heritage status and the iconic Bengal tigers, it's this massive living hydrological engine.
It really is.
And for the millions of people who actually live there, this land is a critical agricultural zone. I mean, their entire rural economy, their livelihoods, their food security, it all depends fundamentally on this delicate balance of the water beneath their feet.
A balance that is unfortunately completely fracturing right now.
Exactly. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a comprehensive review article titled Watering Sundarbans Fields, a systematic review of groundwater and surface water suitability for irrigation. And, okay, let's unpack this. What exactly are the stakes here?
Well, the stakes are essentially the survival of agricultural productivity in, honestly, one of the most complex coastal deltas on Earth.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't just your standard environmental assessment.
Mm-hmm.
The freshwater in this region is under this multi-directional siege.
Oh, multi-directional.
Yeah, we are looking at a landscape facing severe salinity intrusion, shifting climate patterns, and, intense anthropogenic or human-caused pressures that just keep compounding.
Right, they stack on top of each other.
Exactly. So ensuring that the water used for irrigation is actually suitable isn't just about, maximizing crop yield. It is the fundamental requirement for ecosystem conservation and sustainable rural development.
Because if the water goes bad...
If the water quality collapses, the soils degrade, the crops fail, and the entire socioeconomic foundation of the delta just goes with it.
That's heavy. So to understand the findings of this review, we have to look at the mechanisms driving these water challenges. Because it's not just a simple case of, the ocean is rising and making things salty.
Right, not at all.
It's this incredibly complex geographical and historical perfect storm.
It absolutely is. Geographically, you have this massive network of tidal rivers, estuaries, and shallow aquifers directly interfacing with the Bay of Bengal.
Which is naturally vulnerable.
Yeah, that creates inherent vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
You have daily tidal fluctuations that are constantly pushing seawater into the estuaries, but then you layer on modern climate realities.
Right, sea levels rising.
Rising sea levels permanently shifting the saltwater wedge further inland, plus changing rainfall patterns that alter the freshwater recharge rates, and the increasing frequency of cyclones.
Oh, right, the storm surges.
Exactly. Massive, violent storm surges that just inject seawater deep into the freshwater systems.
And this is where the history part completely blew my mind. Because the source material highlights the salinity isn't just coming from the modern ocean.
No, it's out.
They are dealing with pockets of paleo-brackish water that have been trapped deep in the aquifers for, forever.
Yes, and the geology behind that is just fascinating. We are talking about rapid regressive geological events that occurred between 12,000 and 10,000 years ago.
Wow.
During those periods, sea levels retreated really quickly, leaving these massive volumes of marine water trapped in the sedimentary pore spaces.
Just left behind.
Yeah, and over millennia, layers of impermeable clay settled over these pockets, essentially camping them. So you have these ancient, highly pressurized time capsules of salt water sitting deep underground, perfectly preserved.
But the natural geology is really only half the story, right?
Yeah.
The human interference is what's acting as a massive catalyst here, because historically, the major rivers feeding this delta had a direct hydraulic connection upstream to the Himalayan glaciers.
Exactly. You used to have immense volumes of fresh, clean meltwater pouring down through the Ganges system.
Right.
And that constant, massive hydraulic head of fresh water was strong enough to push the seawater back and literally flush the delta.
Keep the salted bay.
Yeah. But over time, due to heavy sedimentation, siltation, and, upstream damming, several of these tide-fed rivers completely lost that critical connection.
Like the Bidyadari River, right?
Take the Bidyadhar. Yeah, perfect example. Centuries ago, it was a highly productive fresh river. Today, the freshwater connection is totally severed.
It's just gone.
Gone.
Yeah.
It's heavily silted, and it basically functions as an industrial and municipal sewage outlet for the massive urban center of Kolkata.
Which fundamentally changes the entire chemistry of the water. I mean, you lose the glacial flush, you add immense urban waste, and then you layer on modern agricultural fertilizers and industrial effluents.
It's a toxic soup.
But let me ask a structural question about the aquifers here. If the surface water is effectively a mix of raw sewage and seawater, why can't the local population just sink deeper wells?
It seems like the obvious answer, right?
Yeah, like if you know the surface is compromised, why not just drill down past the contamination?
It seems logical, but this coastal aquifer system is stratified in a very specific, dangerous way. The interface between fresh and saline groundwater here is like a precarious sandwich.
Okay, a sandwich, how so?
Well, in many parts of the delta, the upper shallow aquifer is heavily contaminated with modern, brackish water and all that surface runoff we just talked about.
Right.
The usable fresh water is trapped in a middle layer, maybe 200 to 300 meters down. But beneath that freshwater lens is where that ancient, trapped paleo-brackish water sits.
Also, if you drill too deep.
If you drill too deep, or even if you just extract the fresh water from the middle layer too aggressively, you depressurize the aquifer.
And the salt comes up.
Exactly. It causes upcoating. That loss of pressure physically pulls that ancient, highly concentrated salt up into your well, permanently ruining it. You simply can't just drill your way out of the problem.
Which means the water system is practically chaotic. It's this hyper-localized mix of ancient salt, modern sea level rise, and heavy urban runoff.
Highly chaotic.
When you are dealing with a system this chaotic, where one well might tap pristine water and another, like 50 yards away, pulls up 12,000-year-old brine, how do scientists even begin to measure what is safe for farming? You can't just dip a standard test strip into a well and call it a day, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. You need a highly synthesized, multidimensional approach, and that was the specific objective of this systematic review.
Right.
The researchers scoured major scientific databases like Google Scholar, ScienceDirect, and PubMed, looking at studies conducted all across the Sundarbans between 2011 and 2023.
And they used a strict Prisma-based screening process to filter the data, which is kind of like a very discerning VIP bouncer at a club. Out of 250 initial articles, only 18 high-quality studies actually made it through the doors.
Because the criteria were incredibly rigorous, to truly evaluate whether this water is suitable for long-term irrigation, the researchers couldn't just look at isolated variables.
They had to look at the whole picture.
Exactly. Those final 18 studies were selected because they successfully integrated hydrological, hydrochemical, and agronomic information. They didn't just measure the water, they measured how the specific chemistry of that water interacts with the soil structure and the crop biology.
Right, and we don't need to retread the absolute basics of water chemistry here. I mean, if you were listening to this, you likely already understand how electrical conductivity and total dissolved solids work.
Right, the fundamentals.
And the basic biological reality that high salinity creates an osmotic pressure gradient that, well, essentially pulls water out of plant cells. It's like eating an intensely salty meal, you get dehydrated. It does the same to the roots, crashing crop yields. We know salt kills crops.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? The review goes way beyond basic salinity, right? They use this complex alphabet soup of specialized irrigation water quality indices.
Yeah, the indices are where the real diagnostic power comes in. Knowing the basic ionic concentrations, the calcium, magnesium, sodium chloride, sulfate, nitrates, that is just step one.
Okay.
The real power comes from how those ions interact with each other and with the earth. Let's look at total hardness and residual sodium carbonate, or RSC.
RSC.
RSC is a critical index because it doesn't just measure what's in the water, it predicts a chemical reaction in the soil.
So what actually happens when water with high RSC hits the agricultural dirt?
When RSC is high, there is an excess of carbonate and bicarbonate ions relative to calcium and magnesium. So when that water enters the soil matrix, it forces the calcium and magnesium to precipitate out of the soil solution.
We precipitate, like they turn solid.
Yes, they literally turn into solid carbonate forms that the plant roots can no longer absorb. And worse, by locking up the calcium, it leaves the sodium behind to dominate the soil structure.
Which leads right into the physical breakdown of the dirt. Because if the salt is already dehydrating the plants, what is that excess sodium and magnesium actually doing to the physical architecture of the soil? Does it fundamentally change it?
It changes it drastically. And that is exactly what indices like the magnesium hazard and Kelly's ratio are measuring.
Okay.
See, clay particles in the soil are naturally negatively charged, so they attract positively charged cations. Under healthy conditions, calcium ions bind to the clay, which encourages flocculation.
Flocculation meaning the soil clumps together, right?
Right, it clumps into small aggregates, leaving plenty of pore space for water, air, and roots to move through.
It keeps the soil breathable and permeable.
Exactly. But magnesium and sodium behave very differently. When the magnesium hazard, or Kelly's ratio, is too high, the sheer concentration of those ions displaces the calcium on the clay particles.
Oh, no.
Yeah, sodium in particular causes soil dispersion. The aggregates completely collapse, the soil loses all its porosity and essentially turns into a hardened, impermeable brick.
A brick. Wow.
Water just pools on the surface and evaporates, leaving even more toxic salt behind. The physical structure of the earth is just destroyed.
So the roots can't penetrate and the water can't percolate. But the chemical aggression of this water doesn't just stop at the soil, which brings us to an aha moment for me. The review highlighted the corrosivity ratio, the CR, which absolutely stunned me.
It's quite something.
I mean, we are talking about farming, but scientists have to actively measure if the water is going to dissolve the infrastructure itself.
Yeah, it gives you a sense of just how hostile this hydrochemical environment has become. The corrosivity ratio evaluates the balance of chloride and sulfate ions against the alkaline components. Okay.
When the CR exceeds safe limits, the water becomes highly aggressive. It actively corrodes the metal casings of the bore wells, the transportation pipes, and all the irrigation machinery.
That is insane.
You can't even move the water from the aquifer to the field without it eating through the metal.
Okay, so with those mechanisms in mind, what did those 18 rigorous studies actually reveal about the Sundarbans? When they ran the surface and groundwater through all these indices, what was the final verdict?
The overarching finding is that, generally speaking, the groundwater exhibited better physicochemical properties than the surface water.
That makes sense.
The surface water, across multiple studies, was shown to be highly compromised by those anthropogenic pressures we discussed earlier. It frequently had completely unacceptable levels of electrical conductivity in total dissolved solids, but there was one metric in the surface water data that was truly extreme.
The pH levels?
Yes. Some surface water samples were recorded with incredibly intense alkalinity, with pH levels jumping all the way up to 15.25.
Oh, hold on. Stop right there. 15.25.
The standard pH scale literally caps at 14.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a pH of 14 is essentially a concentrated lye solution. How on earth do you get a reading of 15.25 in an open body of surface water? What is in that river to break the logarithmic scale?
Right. It is a massive anomaly, and it speaks to the absolute severity of the human interference we are talking about. While the standard pH scale is often taught as 0 to 14, pH is technically just a measure of hydrogen ion concentration.
Okay.
In environments with extreme, hyper-concentrated molarities of strong bases, the mathematical value can actually exceed 14. What this indicates is that the researchers weren't just measuring natural alkaline runoff.
They're Russian chemicals.
Yeah, they were almost certainly capturing highly concentrated caustic industrial effluents. Plumes of extreme chemical discharge, likely sodium hydroxides from local manufacturing, or intense localized agricultural chemical dumps mixing into the estuarine surface water before it could dilute.
Wow.
It means parts of the surface water system are behaving more like an industrial chemical vat than a natural river.
That is terrifying for anyone trying to pull water from those rivers to grow food. But what about the groundwater? If the surface water is a caustic nightmare, does the groundwater pass the test?
What's fascinating here is, unfortunately, no. When the researchers applied those specialized indices to the groundwater, the results showed severe, widespread limitations.
Oh, across the board.
Mostly, yeah. Excessive salinity, high total hardness, dangerous levels of residual sodium carbonate, elevated magnesium hazards, and aggressive corrosivity ratios frequently exceeded the recommended limits.
Right.
The synthesis of the 18 studies paints a very clear picture. A vast majority of both the surface and groundwater requires incredibly careful, deliberate management before it can be safely used for agriculture.
But I want to push back on that uniform conclusion for a second, because when I was reading the data in the review, I saw that the permeability index, the PI, and the sodium absorption ratio, the SAR, actually indicated highly favorable conditions in several specific locations for both ground and surface water. How can a water source be chemically favorable for farming and a toxic soil-destroying hazard at the exact same time?
That is the paradox of coastal delta hydrogeochemistry. It's not a contradiction, though it's a demonstration of how hyper-localized and nuanced water quality management has to be.
Walk me through the mechanism of that paradox.
Sure. Think about what the indices actually measure. A water source might have a very good permeability index and a low sodium absorption ratio.
Okay.
That means the balance of sodium relative to calcium is low enough that the water won't immediately cause the clay particles to disperse. The physical soil structure remains loose and breathable.
So the water will flow through the dirt beautifully. The dirt doesn't turn into a brick. That sounds great.
It is great for the dirt, but that exact same water might simultaneously have a massive potential salinity, or PS. The PS measures the concentration of chlorides and half of the sulfates.
Ah, I see.
So the water flows through the perfectly structured soil just fine, but as it flows, it leaves behind an overwhelming volume of chloride salts. The soil stays loose, but the osmotic pressure spikes, and the roots of sensitive crops are completely fried.
Wow.
You can't just slap a blanket good or bad label on a well. It demands a highly balanced interpretation. What keeps the soil physically viable in one village might be chemically toxic to the specific crop they are trying to grow.
So if the water is displaying this incredibly chaotic, localized mix of suitable physical traits and disastrous chemical traits, what are the invisible hydrogeochemical processes actually driving this underneath the surface?
This is where we look at the chloroalkaline indices, the CAI, which track the intricate rock-water interactions happening deep underground. The primary drivers are natural geological processes operating over millennia, carbonate dissolution, and silicate weathering.
Meaning the rocks making up the aquifer are slowly dissolving.
Right, and the ions in the water are constantly reacting with the minerals in the rock.
Like a massive underground chemical exchange program.
Exactly, it's called ion exchange. The review found that in the surface water and the Indian portions of the Sundarbans groundwater, there is primarily a direct ion exchange happening.
What does that mean?
It means the sodium and potassium ions floating in the water are actively trading places with the magnesium and calcium ions locked in the host rocks. The water is constantly altering the rock, and the rock is constantly altering the water in an endless feedback loop.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This natural geological engine, which usually moves at a glacial evolutionary pace, is being completely supercharged by human activity, isn't it?
The acceleration is massive. When millions of farmers applied diverse chemical fertilizers, specifically those rich in sulfates, nitrates, and gypsum, those chemicals don't just sit on the topsoil.
They wash down.
Yeah, they percolate down through the sedimentary layers, and as they enter the aquifer, they act as catalysts. They alter the chemical equilibrium of the groundwater, which in turn accelerates the weathering of the underground silicate and carbonate rocks.
So you combine that aggressive fertilizer percolation with the caustic urban wastewater flowing out of Kolkata, the industrial effluents driving the pH anomalies, and the active saltwater intrusion from the Bay of Bengal. It creates this dynamic, hyper-accelerated hydrochemical loop.
A very chaotic loop.
Nature and human activity are locked in a very messy dance, deep underground. Modern human activity and 12,000-year-old geology just colliding.
And that messy dance is exactly why the irrigation indices are flashing warning signs across the board. The natural system was already delicately balanced, and anthropogenic pressure is rapidly pushing it past its buffering capacity.
So let's bring it all back to the practical reality for you, the listener. If you were a hydrogeologist, a policymaker, or a farmer in the Sundarbans staring down this data, what do you actually do? The water is eating your pipes, breaking your soil, and dehydrating your crops. How do we solve this?
Well, the review makes it very clear that there is no single magic bullet. Survival requires a highly coordinated, interdisciplinary mitigation strategy. First, the region has to radically reduce its reliance on the most contaminated deep groundwater aquifers to prevent pulling up more of that ancient paleo-brackish salt.
Right, to stop the upconing.
Exactly. That requires massive infrastructure investments in rainwater harvesting and the construction of extensive surface water reservoirs to capture and store the heavy monsoon rains.
You have to capture the pure water before it flushes out to the bay.
Exactly. For the groundwater that simply must be used, the review points to advanced treatment techniques like reverse osmosis and specialized ion exchange treatments to strip out the excess magnesium and sodium.
But those are heavily infrastructure dependent, right?
Yeah, and expensive to maintain in rural environments.
Which means the ultimate solution has to involve changing how the farming itself is done on the ground.
Right. Agronomic practices have to adapt to the chemistry. This means moving away from traditional, highly sensitive crops and implementing strategic crop selection, planting new, highly salt-tolerant varieties.
Okay, that makes sense.
It also requires precision irrigation scheduling to flush the soils during specific times of the year, minimizing the long-term salt buildup. You need the hydrogeologists analyzing the CAI data, talking to the agronomists analyzing the soil structure, who are talking directly to the farmers managing the water flow.
It is a monumental challenge, but understanding the intricate chemistry of the water is the absolute first necessary step to survival. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over.
Oh, definitely.
It's something that really struck me while digesting the scale of this review. We so often frame climate change and environmental degradation as purely modern crises driven entirely by recent industrial emissions and modern runoff. But right now, in the deep aquifers of the Sundarbans, modern chemical fertilizers and modern sea level rise are actively interacting with trapped, highly pressurized, 12,000-year-old seawater.
It's staggering.
It really makes you wonder, how many other coastal agricultural regions around the entire world are sitting on their own invisible geological time capsules of ancient salinity, just waiting for modern human activity to unknowingly pull the trigger and release them?
It is a profound realization, and it fundamentally changes how we need to approach coastal groundwater management globally, not just in the Sundarbans.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the complex, ancient, and deeply vital waters of the Sundarbans. Keep questioning what is beneath the surface.